The cool, crisp air of early morning carried the distant, melodious chime of the palace bells across the valley to Ilara's small village. From her vantage point on the weathered stone steps of her family's cottage, she could just glimpse the highest spires of the royal palace of Eldoria, gleaming like distant diamonds in the nascent sunlight. It was a world away, not just in distance, but in every conceivable facet of life. Her hands, calloused from weaving and tending the small garden, often paused in their work, her gaze drifting toward those distant, impossible towers. She imagined the silks and velvets that adorned its residence, the rich banquets, the hushed whispers of power and intrigue that must echo through its grand halls. A wistful sigh escaped her lips, a sound swallowed by the chirping of sparrows and the rustle of leaves in the orchard. Her life was simple, woven from the threads of sunrises and sunsets, the comforting rhythm of daily chores and the familiar faces of her neighbors. Yet, within her, a quiet current of longing always flowed, a yearning for something more, something undefined but intensely felt. She wasn't sure what more truly meant, only that it resided somewhere beyond the familiar fields and the well-trodden path to the village market. Often, she found herself sketching intricate patterns on scrap parchment, designs that held no practical use in her world but spoke of a beauty she only dreamed of. The rhythmic clatter of hooves on the cobbled path startled her from her reverie. It wasn't the usual sound of a farmer's cart or a returning hunter. This was heavier, more deliberate. A magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming, rounded the bend, carrying a rider clad in the unmistakable crimson and gold livery of the royal guard. The air in the village seemed to thicken, a collective hush falling over the normally bustling square. Children stopped their games, women paused in their washing, and even the dogs ceased their barking. A royal messenger rarely ventured this deep into the valley, and never for a casual visit. The messenger, a man of stern countenance and impressive height, dismounted with an almost theatrical grace, his eyes sweeping over the gathered villagers before settling directly on Ilara's cottage. Her heart gave a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. He held a rolled scroll, bound with the royal seal. "Is this the residence of Ilara, daughter of Alden?" his voice boomed, carrying across the silent square. Ilara's breath hitched. Her father, a kind, unassuming man, emerged from the cottage, wiping flour from his hands. "Yes, good sir, she is my daughter." He gestured towards Ilara, who felt a sudden, intense heat flush her cheeks. All eyes were now on her. The messenger strode forward, the leather of his boots creaking with each step. He unfurled the scroll with a snap. "By royal decree of King Ferron, all eligible maidens within the kingdom of Eldoria are hereby summoned to the royal selection, to be held at the palace in 1 week's time. This summons is specifically for Ilara, daughter of Alden. You are to present yourself at the palace gates at dawn, 6 days hence." He held the scroll out. Ilara stood frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend the words. The royal selection? For her? It was a tradition as old as the kingdom itself, a grand event where young women of noble birth, and sometimes those from prosperous merchant families, were presented to the king, one of whom would eventually become his queen. A humble village girl, unnoticed and unknown, would never be among them. It was unthinkable, a mistake, surely. Her father, equally bewildered, took the scroll with trembling hands. "But, good sir, there must be an error. My daughter she is not of noble lineage. She is a simple weaver." The messenger's expression remained impassive. "The decree is clear," Alden. The summons is for Elara. The king's word is law. Be at the gates, do not be late. With that, he remounted his stallion, gave a sharp nod, and rode off, leaving behind a profound silence and a girl whose world had just been irrevocably tilted on its axis. Elara stared at the empty space where the messenger had been, her fingers unconsciously tracing the rough weave of her simple linen dress. Hesitant hope, fragile as spun glass, began to bloom in her chest, battling with a deep current of confusion. Why her? What could this possibly mean? She knew nothing of courtly manners, nothing of the grand expectations of the palace. The whispers of a dream she had nurtured in secret now seemed to take on a terrifying, tangible form. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. The palace, once a distant, beautiful fantasy, was now a looming reality. She had 6 days to prepare for a journey into the unknown, a journey that promised either unimaginable possibilities or profound heartbreak. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She looked at her father, his face etched with concern, and then back towards the distant spires, now shining with a light that seemed less inviting and more daunting. A world apart. The palace gates, a grand arch of wrought iron intertwined with gilded vines, swung open with a slow, resonant groan, swallowing Elara whole. Her breath hitched. She'd expected grandeur, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The cobblestone path, so meticulously laid it gleamed in the afternoon sun, stretched towards a towering edifice of white marble and sparkling mosaics. Turrets, impossibly tall, pierced the sky like sharpened silver needles, each adorned with banners depicting the royal crest, a snarling wolf's head silhouetted against a rising sun. Carriages, more elaborate than any she'd ever seen, lined the courtyard, their polished panels reflecting the kaleidoscopic light of stained glass windows. Footmen in liveried uniforms, crisp and starched, moved with effortless grace, their white gloves a stark contrast to their dark attire. The air hummed with a different kind of energy here, a palpable buzz of anticipation and thinly veiled ambition. It was the scent of expensive perfumes, mingled with the aroma of exotic flowers blooming in sculpted gardens, and something else, a metallic tang of power. Inside, the great hall was a cavernous space where light, filtered through soaring arched windows, painted shifting patterns across the polished floors. Tapestries depicting ancient battles and mythical beasts draped from the impossibly high ceilings, their threads shimmering with gold and silver. Elara felt dwarfed, a tiny moth fluttering in a cathedral. Her simple linen dress, her only nice garment, felt coarse and threadbare against the backdrop of such unimaginable wealth. She clutched the small worn satchel containing her few belongings, her knuckles white. Then she saw them. Dozens of women moving with an almost predatory elegance, their gowns, fashioned from silks and brocades in every hue imaginable, rustled like autumn leaves. Jewels, catching the light from crystal chandeliers, glittered at their throats, wrists, and in their intricately styled hair. Their laughter, light and melodic, floated through the hall, punctuated by hushed whispers and the clinking of delicate teacups. One woman in particular stood out. Her dress, a vibrant emerald green, seemed to ripple with a life of its own as she moved. Her dark hair was coiled into an elaborate braid, woven with pearls, and her eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the room with an almost regal disdain. This was Seraphina, Lady of House Thorn, Elara recognized from the rare portraits she'd seen. Seraphina's smile, directed at a group of admiring noblewomen, was a carefully constructed mask of charm, but Alara caught a fleeting glimpse of something else beneath it, a flicker of ruthless determination. As Alara stood there, a solitary island in a sea of opulence, a new wave of unease washed over her. It wasn't just the overwhelming grandeur or the sheer number of contenders. It was the way they looked at each other. A subtle sizing up, a silent competition playing out in every glance, every perfectly poised posture. This wasn't a gathering of ladies. It was a battlefield draped in silk. She watched Seraphina smoothly intercept another noblewoman, Lady Isolde, just as Isolde was about to approach a group of influential lords. Seraphina's hand rested lightly on Isolde's arm, her voice sweet as honey, yet her eyes held a warning. Isolde's polite smile faltered for a moment before she gracefully conceded, turning away with a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. Alara's stomach churned. This wasn't a mistake she could quietly rectify. This was a grand, public, and potentially humiliating error. Her summons, once a thrilling mystery, now felt like a cruel jest. She was a village weaver, accustomed to the quiet rhythm of her loom, to the honest scent of wool and dye. Here, she was a discordant note in a symphony of power and privilege, a stray bird in a gilded cage full of hawks. The gravity of her situation, the sheer audacity of her presence, settled over her like a suffocating shroud. She didn't belong, and the longer she stayed, the more profound and painful that truth would become. The king's rejection. The murmur of the court faded to a suffocating hush as Alara was ushered forward. Each step on the polished marble floor echoed her pounding heart. Before her, on a raised dais, sat King Alaric. His regal posture, the severe cut of his dark tunic, and the heavy gold circlet that crowned his brow only amplified the chasm between them. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over her, devoid of recognition or perhaps any real interest. The brief contact was like a blast of cold air, confirming her worst fears. "Approach, girl," a gruff voice from the king's council commanded. Alara's legs felt like lead. She stopped a respectful distance, her gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the rug, unwilling to meet the judging eyes of the court. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the barely concealed snickers from the noble women. Lady Seraphina's triumphant smirk was a pinprick against Alara's already fraying composure. Lord Valerius, positioned subtly to the king's right, offered a small, disingenuous smile that did not reach his calculating eyes. His presence felt like a chill wind, even from across the vast hall. King Alaric finally spoke, his voice deep and resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the palace. "You are Alara, the weaver?" The word hung in the air, thick with unspoken disdain. Alara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Yes, Your Majesty." Her voice was barely a whisper. A rustle of silks and low murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Lord Valerius leaned in, whispering something to a council member, his gaze flicking to Alara with an unnerving intensity. Alaric's jaw tightened, his gaze now fixed on her with an almost surgical precision. "My council has brought a peculiar matter to my attention," Alaric continued, his tone hardening. "There has been a mistake, a grave error in the summons." He paused, allowing the implication to settle. "You are not of the lineage required. You are, in every sense, unfit for the role we seek to fill." Each word was a hammer blow. Alara's breath hitched. She could feel her cheeks burning, not just from embarrassment, but from the raw wound of his dismissal. The selection process requires a certain caliber, Alaric stated, his eyes sweeping over the snickering nobles as if seeking their approval. Lineage, bearing, an understanding of courtly life, qualities, I am afraid, you simply do not possess. He paused, letting his words sink in, a deliberate cruelty. You are a village weaver, nothing more. This court has no place for such simplicity. You are a mistake. The final word, mistake, was delivered with a cold finality that shattered something within Alara. It wasn't just a rejection of her presence, but a dismissal of her very being. The grand hall, once overwhelming, now felt like a cage designed to highlight her insignificance. She heard Lady Seraphina's barely suppressed giggle, sharp as a shard of ice. Lord Valerius's charming smile broadened, a predatory glint in his eyes. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and numb. The opulent tapestries, the gleaming chandeliers, the glittering jewels of the courtiers, all blurred into an oppressive haze. Her vision swam with unshed tears. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the marble floor. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. She managed a small, shaky curtsy, her eyes still downcast, unable to meet the king's gaze or anyone else's. "Understood, Your Majesty," she choked out, her voice raw. Without another word, without a glance back at the imposing figure on the dais or the sneering faces of the court, Alara turned and fled. The whispers and titters followed her, sharp as arrows piercing her back. The grand hall, once an object of awe, now represented her profound, crushing humiliation. Each hurried step away from the dais was an attempt to outrun the searing shame, to escape the echoing pronouncement of her unworthiness. She left behind the battlefield, draped in silk, her heart a fractured thing, leaving the palace before dawn. Flight into the storm. The stone beneath Alara's worn slippers was a blur. Each step was a frantic echo of the humiliation that still burned in her cheeks. The grand halls, once a dizzying spectacle, now felt like a suffocating labyrinth, every archway a gaping maw, every shadowed corner a hidden sneer. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to be gone. The stifled snickers of the courtiers, the contempt in Lord Valerius's gaze, Lady Seraphina's triumphant smirk, they were a relentless drumbeat in her ears, propelling her forward. She burst through a servant's entrance, the heavy oak door thudding shut behind her with a finality that mirrored the death of her hopes. The air outside was a bitter lash, a stark contrast to the stifling warmth within. She found herself in a moon-dappled garden, the meticulously manicured hedges blurring into formless shadows. Her breath hitched in her throat, a ragged sob threatening to break free. She pressed a hand to her mouth, biting back the sound, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her pain. The palace grounds were vast, unfamiliar, a maze of pathways and manicured lawns. She stumbled, her vision blurred by tears, her movements clumsy. The elegant fountains with their cascading water seemed to mock her with their serene beauty. She skirted around a topiary shaped like a proud stag, its silent vigil a painful reminder of the world she was so unfit for. Her simple homespun dress, once a source of comfort, now felt like a scarlet letter proclaiming her inadequacy. Finally, she reached the outer wall, a towering edifice that seemed to touch the bruised indigo sky. A forgotten gate, rust-eaten and overgrown with ivy, offered a sliver of escape. She tugged at the heavy iron handle, her fingers numb with cold and despair. It creaked open, groaning in protest, revealing a dense, dark forest beyond. The air immediately grew colder, carrying the damp scent of pine and decaying leaves. She plunged into the thicket, the branches clawing at her hair and tearing at her dress. The smooth, predictable pathways of the palace grounds were replaced by uneven earth, roots snaking like serpents beneath her feet. The darkness here was absolute, save for the slivers of moonlight that pierced the canopy, creating fleeting, deceptive shapes. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. She hugged herself, trying to ward off both the chill that seeped into her bones and the icy grip of her shame. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, each tree a silent, judging sentinel. Her legs ached, her lungs burned with the effort, but she pushed on, driven by the desperate need for distance. She had to cross the border, to escape the king's domain, to erase herself from the memory of that terrible morning. The thought of ever seeing another noble face, another snaring smile, made her stomach churn. As she stumbled deeper, a faint dusting of white began to appear on the undergrowth, a fine, glittering powder that signaled a change in the weather. The air grew perceptibly colder, the biting wind whispering through the bare branches of the trees. Soon, the dusting turned into a steady fall, large, wet flakes swirling down from the darkened heavens. The snow, initially a beautiful, almost magical sight, quickly became another obstacle. It melted on her exposed skin, soaking through her thin slippers, turning the forest floor into a treacherous, slippery expanse. Her teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, but her simple clothes offered no defense against the encroaching cold. The tears on her cheeks froze, tightening her skin. She shivered violently, her movements becoming less purposeful, more like a desperate shuffle. The faint path she had been following was now obliterated by the fresh snow, leaving her utterly lost in the deepening white. She felt a profound loneliness, a stark contrast to the bustling, if cruel, life of the palace. Here, there was only the cold, the silence, and the crushing weight of her own insignificance. The kingdom's border, once a beacon of escape, now seemed an impossible, distant dream, swallowed by the relentless freezing storm. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body screaming for rest, but the image of Alaric's cold, dismissive eyes burned behind them, a cruel fire that kept her moving, even as her strength ebbed away. The wolf's fury. The crunch of Elara's worn boots on the frozen earth marked her passage, each step a desperate plea for distance. She hadn't dared to look back, the palace a mocking silhouette against the swirling snow. Her breath plumed in icy clouds, her fingers numb inside her threadbare cloak. Just ahead, the line of ancient gnarled oaks marked the true border of the king's lands. As her foot lifted over a root, crossing the invisible boundary, a strange tremor vibrated through the frozen ground, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to rattle her very bones. It was a sensation both primal and fleeting, gone as quickly as it came, leaving her to wonder if it had been a trick of the wind or her own frayed nerves. She didn't linger to ponder it, the urgency to escape overriding all else. Back within the palace walls, a different kind of tremor erupted. King Alaric stood in his private chambers, the bitter taste of political maneuvering still fresh in his mouth. He dismissed the weaver girl, Elara, with a coldness that had left him feeling hollow, a necessary cruelty to appease the snarling wolves of his court. He was mid-sentence with Lord Valerius, dissecting the morning's charade, when a guttural snarl ripped through the stone, vibrating up from the very foundations of the castle. It wasn't the controlled deep rumble of his wolf, but a raw, unhinged shriek of pure rage. Alaric felt it like a blow to the chest, a sudden searing pain as his own inner beast clawed at its confines, desperate to break free. Valerius, his face paling, backed away as Alaric clutched his head, a primal scream threatening to tear from his own throat. The snarl intensified, followed by the sickening splinter of wood and the crash of ancient masonry. "What in the blazes?" Valerius stammered, but Alaric was already moving, drawn by an irresistible, terrifying force. He burst into the adjoining corridor to a scene of utter devastation. His wolf, a magnificent beast of charcoal fur and eyes like molten gold, was a whirlwind of destruction. It tore through the heavy oak doors of the royal apartments, shredding tapestries, overturning antique tables, its powerful jaws snapping at the air, its roars echoing with a horrifying, wounded agony. Guards, brave but outmatched, scattered before its furious charge. Never had Alaric seen such unbridled savagery from his own companion, not even in battle. "Stop!" Alaric bellowed, his voice laced with the alpha command, a force that usually brought his wolf to heel instantly. But the beast didn't even falter. It was oblivious, driven by something far more potent than his will. Its head was thrown back, its powerful nose twitching, searching, following an invisible trail. A desperate, almost whimpering sound escaped its throat, a sound of profound loss and frantic pursuit. Alaric scrambled, dodging a flying shard of gilded mirror, his mind racing. He tried to project his will, to tether his wolf, but it was like trying to hold back a tsunami with a thread. The beast was consumed, its eyes burning with an almost human anguish. It clawed at the air, tracing a path, a scent that only it could perceive. Then, with a final earth-shattering roar, it launched itself through a shattered window, landing with a bone-jarring thud on the snow-covered courtyard below. Alaric reached the window, staring down at the paw prints already fading in the relentless snowfall. He felt it then, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper in his own blood. A scent, fading, distant, but undeniably there. The sweet, wild essence of forest, and the hint of something uniquely Alara. His wolf wasn't just raging, it was chasing her. A cold dread seeped into Alaric's bones, far colder than the winter air. The tremor Alara had felt as she crossed the border. His wolf's sudden, violent eruption. The scent. It clicked into place with horrifying clarity. His wolf had not chosen a mate from the carefully selected noblewomen. It had chosen the humble weaver girl. And he, King Alaric, in his blind political machinations, had just cast her out into the unforgiving snow. A king's suspicion. Alaric's ragged breathing filled the ruined throne room, his chest still heaving as the last tremors of the wolf's fury receded. Tapestries lay shredded, marble cracked, and the scent of ozone clung heavily to the air. His hands, though no longer clenched, still vibrated with residual power. He fixed his gaze on Lord Valerius, who stood paralyzed beside a splintered pillar, his features frozen in stark terror. The fear etched on Valerius's face wasn't merely for the devastation. It was for the raw, untamed force he had just witnessed. "Lord Valerius!" Alaric's voice, a low growl strained with residual intensity, resonated with undeniable authority. "Summon the advisors, all of them, now!" Valerius scrambled, his customary aristocratic composure utterly shattered. He barked orders at the terrified guards, and soon the remaining advisors, pale and visibly shaken, converged in the chaotic hall. Their eyes flitted from the widespread destruction to Alaric, a king they now perceived in a terrifyingly new light. "Explain yourselves," Alaric began, his voice dangerously calm. "Explain how a common weaver, Ilara, appeared for this election. Detail the unprecedented circumstances of her summons, and be swift, before my patience and my wolf are entirely spent." His gaze swept over them, pausing on each face, searching for a telltale shift, a flicker of guilt. Lord Valerius, ever the most outspoken, cleared his throat, his voice still edged with tremor. "Your Majesty, it was a clerical error, a misinterpretation of the records. Her name, Ilara, bore a similarity to another from a minor noble house. A regrettable oversight, we assure you." Alaric scoffed, the sound devoid of humor. "A regrettable oversight that provoked a reaction from my wolf never before witnessed? A clerical error that plunged him into a destructive frenzy the moment she crossed the border?" He slammed a fist onto the shattered remains of a decorative table, the wood groaning in protest. "My wolf chose her. Chose her. And you, in your regrettable oversight, ensured her public humiliation and banishment." The advisors exchanged nervous glances. The unspoken implication hung heavy. Alaric's wolf, the very essence of his alpha power, had instinctively recognized its mate, and the king had unknowingly driven her away. "This was no error," Alaric continued, his suspicion hardening into conviction. "Someone orchestrated this. Someone desired her rejection."
Someone sought to diminish my authority, perhaps, or to eliminate a potential threat by removing a queen chosen by instinct rather than political convenience. He paced the length of the hall, his boots crunching on debris. The speed with which news of her dismissal spread, the smug satisfaction I glimpsed on certain faces. It wasn't a mistake, it was a setup. Lord Valerius, regaining a sliver of his usual nerve, interjected, "Your Majesty, to suggest a conspiracy within your own court. It's a grave accusation." Alaric whirled to face him, his eyes blazing. "And what would you call this, Valerius? My wolf, a creature of pure instinct, an extension of my very soul, has never reacted like this. Not for any previous queen, not for any challenge, not for any threat. He chose Elara, and the instant she was outside my protection, he broke free to pursue her." He gripped Valerius's shoulder, his fingers digging in. "Tell me, Valerius, who profits from a king whose wolf is denied its mate? Who benefits from a king who is weakened, distracted, and possibly barren?" The last word was a whisper, a chilling pronouncement that resonated through the room. The implication was clear. A king whose wolf was denied its mate might struggle to produce an heir, or worse, become unstable. The advisors blanched. This transcended a mere public relations blunder. It was a matter of succession and the very stability of the kingdom. "I want answers," Alaric commanded, releasing Valerius with a shove. "Every detail of Ilara's summons, every person involved in her vetting, every whisper, every rumor regarding her presence, I want it all, and I want it now. My wolf remains unsettled. He is calling for her. If anything happens to her, if she is harmed out there because of your machinations," his voice dropped to a guttural snarl, "I will tear this kingdom apart to find the truth, and then I will tear apart those who conspired against me." The urgency in his voice was palpable, a desperate plea interwoven with a terrifying threat. He had to find her, not merely for his wolf, but for himself. He had dismissed her, shamed her, and now he felt the profound, aching emptiness of her absence. He had to understand. He had to atone. And he had to uncover the venomous plot that had almost cost him everything.
Desperate pursuit. The stables erupted in a cacophony of panicked shouts and frantic whinnying as Alaric burst through the doors, his eyes alight with a dangerous intensity. "Saddle Firebrand, now!" he commanded, his voice raw with the power thrumming beneath his skin. Gareth, the burly stablemaster, moved with uncharacteristic haste, his face pale with alarm. Alaric didn't wait, snatching a bridle and bit himself, his hands working with urgent, practiced precision. Each second stretched into an agonizing eternity, a lifetime bleeding away while Alara, isolated and vulnerable, confronted the unforgiving wilderness. He flung himself onto Firebrand's back. The magnificent stallion snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the king's frantic energy. Alaric spurred him on before the saddle was fully settled, the horse rocketing from the stable yard into the encroaching dusk. The palace guards, still reeling from the earlier turmoil, watched in stunned silence as their king, oblivious to his crown or his safety, vanished into the swirling snow that had begun its descent. The forest swallowed him whole, a labyrinth of skeletal trees and deepening drifts. The air bit at his face, each gust of wind a cruel whisper of Alara's plight. Alaric hunched over Firebrand's neck, pushing the horse to a grueling pace, testing both their limits. The snow, initially light, now fell in earnest, thick flakes blurring the path, transforming the familiar woods into an alien, hostile expanse. Within him, his wolf raged, a tempest of regret and desperation, a constant agonizing ache. It was a guttural, primal sound, vibrating through his very bones, a lament for the mate he had so carelessly discarded. He closed his eyes for a moment, surrendering to the wolf's guidance, straining to discern even the faintest wisp of her unique scent beneath the damp earth and the falling snow. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible trace, wildflowers and warm summer rain, more a memory than a tangible presence, but it was enough. It was his anchor in the storm, his sole beacon in the encroaching darkness. "You were cruel, Alaric," the wolf snarled, its voice a rasp of self-loathing in his mind. "You crushed her spirit for the sake of appearances. You called her common, dismissed her as a mistake, and now she pays the price for your cowardice." He gritted his teeth, guilt a searing brand on his chest. Every harsh word he'd uttered in the throne room echoed, each syllable a dagger plunged deeper into his heart. He remembered the flicker of hope in her eyes when she first stepped forward, the tentative smile, the quiet dignity. Then, the dawning horror, the blush of shame, the quiet despair as his words, a clerical error, nothing more, stripped her of all worth. He hadn't just rejected her, he had publicly humiliated her, cast her out into a world that would brand her as damaged. The snow deepened, muffling Firebrand's hooves, making every stride a struggle. Branches, heavy with their white burden, reached out like skeletal fingers, clawing at his cloak. He knew this forest, its treacherous ravines and hidden pitfalls, but the storm was reshaping it, rendering it unrecognizable. He had to find her. He had to. The thought of Elara, alone and unprotected, lost in this freezing wilderness, was a torment worse than any physical pain. He envisioned her small, delicate form, shivering, perhaps already succumbing to the cold. A frigid dread, sharper than the wind, pierced him. The wolf surged, a wave of raw power threatening to overwhelm him. It wasn't just concern, it was a desperate, instinctive imperative to reclaim what was theirs, what he had foolishly cast aside. The bond, ignored and denied, now asserted itself with terrifying vengeance, threatening to tear him apart from within. He pushed Firebrand harder, ignoring the horse's labored breathing, ignoring the ache in his own muscles. He would ride until he collapsed, until Firebrand collapsed, but he would not stop. He couldn't, not when Ilara's life and perhaps his own sanity hung in the balance. The king had made a profound, unforgivable mistake, and now he would face the storm, both within and without, to rectify it. A frozen hope. The blizzard clawed at Alaric, each gust a fresh lash of his wolf's fury. Hours bled into an eternity of white, Firebrand's hooves churning through drifts that threatened to swallow them whole. But the scent, faint and fragile, persisted. A primal tug, a desperate thread in the tapestry of the storm, guiding him deeper into the merciless wilderness. He pushed Firebrand harder, the horse's breath pluming in frozen clouds, mirroring the king's own ragged gasps. Then, through a brief swirling break in the snowfall, he saw her. A huddled form beneath a gnarled, snow-laden oak, indistinguishable from a drift, save for the dark huddle of her cloak. His heart, already a battlefield, seized. Dismounting, he stumbled forward, the snow muffling his every frantic step. Ilara. Her face was a ghastly white, lips tinged blue, eyes closed. A thin layer of frost dusted her eyelashes. She was shivering, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that racked her entire frame. Yet her skin felt impossibly cold beneath his gloved touch. "Alara!" His voice was a raw croak, ripped from his throat by a fear he hadn't known he possessed. No response. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the wolf's haze. He gently scooped her into his arms. She was feather-light, terrifyingly so, her body stiff with cold. He could feel the desperate, fragile beat of her heart against his chest, a tiny bird fluttering against a frozen cage. He wrapped her tighter in his cloak, the thick wool offering scant warmth against the pervasive chill. Firebrand whinnied softly, nudging his hand. The cabin, the old hunting lodge, barely a league from here, was their only hope. He mounted Firebrand with Ilara cradled against him, shielding her as best he could from the biting wind. The journey felt endless, each footfall a test of his resolve. He spoke to her in soft murmurs, promises whispered into the howling storm, though he knew she couldn't hear. "Just a little further, Ilara. Hold on." He could feel the tremors in her body growing weaker, a terrifying sign. Finally, a faint glow pierced the swirling white, the hunting cabin. He dismounted clumsily, nearly dropping her in his haste. Kicking the door open, he carried her inside, the small space a blessed reprieve from the tempest. He laid her gently on the worn cot, its straw mattress rustling softly. His hands, still numb from the cold, fumbled with the kindling. He needed fire, and he needed it now. A spark caught, then another, until a small defiant flame danced in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across Ilara's pale face. He stripped off his heavy outer garments, then, with trembling hands, began to carefully remove her frozen cloak and sodden tunic. Her skin was marbled, an alarming mosaic of red and white, cold to the touch. Guilt, a crushing physical weight, descended upon him. This was his doing. His grand pronouncements, his political maneuvering had driven her into this frozen hell. The image of her tear-streaked face in the selection hall, the shame in her eyes, replayed with sickening clarity. He smoothed back a damp strand of hair from her forehead, his touch feather-light. "Forgive me," he whispered, the words hoarse, torn from the deepest chambers of his fractured soul. He chafed her hands and feet, trying to coax warmth back into them.
his own wolf howling with a mixture of relief and agonizing self-reproach. He would make this right. He had to. The bitter truth. A gasp tore from Elara's throat, her eyes snapping open to the flickering firelight. Disorientation warred with a searing pain in her limbs, a strange warmth spreading through her veins. Then she saw him. King Alaric, his face etched with concern, sat beside her, his large hand gently brushing a damp cloth across her forehead. The memory of the selection, his cruel words, the icy wind, all slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. You. The word ripped from her, raw and laced with venom. She tried to scramble backward, but her body was too weak, her muscles screaming in protest. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Don't touch me! Alaric flinched, pulling his hand back as if burned. His expression shifted, the concern deepening into something like anguish. Elara, please. You're safe. You were nearly frozen. Frozen? Because of you! Her voice was hoarse, tears stinging her eyes as the humiliation resurfaced, sharper than any cold. You cast me out. You shamed me in front of everyone, called me common, a mistake. I almost died in that forest because of your cruelty. She pushed herself up, bracing on trembling arms, her gaze burning into his. What are you doing here? Have you come to finish the job? To make sure your mistake is truly gone? Alaric's shoulders slumped, his gaze falling to his hands. No, Elara. Never. I was wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. His voice was low, rough with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. I followed you. My wolf. It drove me. It wouldn't let me rest. Elara scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Your wolf? So your beast has more compassion than its master? How ironic. Or perhaps it simply enjoys the hunt. She clutched the rough woolen blanket around her, the warmth doing little to thaw the ice around her heart. You made a spectacle of me, a common weaver, dragged before the court, only to be tossed aside like refuse. Do you know what that felt like? To stand there, naked in my vulnerability, while you performed for your nobles. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers, a raw vulnerability in their depths that startled her. I know, and I swear to you, Elara, there are no words to express the depth of my regret. My actions that day, they were a political calculation, a desperate attempt to appease a council that was already conspiring against me. They presented you as a test, a way to publicly prove my adherence to tradition, to show them I would not be swayed by anything unconventional. He paused, a tremor in his voice. But the moment I said those words, the moment I saw the hurt in your eyes, my wolf, it erupted. It knew. It knew even before I did. Elara stared at him, her anger still a raging fire, but a flicker of confusion began to stir. Political calculation, conspiring counsel. Knew what? She demanded, her voice still sharp, but with a thread of bewildered curiosity. Alaric took a deep, shuddering breath, his gaze unwavering. It knew you were mine, my fated mate. The words hung in the air, heavy and shocking. Elara's mind reeled. His mate? The king, the alpha, whose every word had been a knife to her heart. Her vision blurred. Not from tears this time, but from the sheer impossibility of it. You lie, she whispered, shaking her head. You rejected me. Mates don't reject each other.
I rejected you with my words, with my fear, with my blindness, he countered, his voice thick with self-loathing. But my wolf, it never did. It fought me from the moment you were brought before me. It tore through the palace when you left, desperate to follow your scent. And when I found you, half dead in the snow, I understood. The pain, the rage, the primal need to protect you, it all clicked into place. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. They set a trap, Elara. They wanted me to reject you. They knew what you were to me, and they used it to destabilize me, to weaken the kingdom. My wolf is tearing me apart from the inside, Elara. It's been inconsolable since I banished you. I can't rule. I can barely think. The kingdom is in peril because of my foolishness. Elara watched him, her anger slowly, reluctantly, giving way to a new, unsettling emotion. He didn't look like the arrogant king who had condemned her. He looked broken, burdened by a truth too heavy to bear. The raw remorse in his eyes, the tremor in his voice, felt genuine. Her pain was still a vast, aching chasm, but she saw a man caught in a different kind of torment. The weight of his guilt seemed to press down on him, making him appear smaller, more human. So, she said, her voice barely a whisper, you're telling me that after you publicly humiliated me, after you left me to die, you now claim I'm your mate? The absurdity of it was still staggering, but a fragile thread of curiosity, born from her own innate understanding of the mate bond, pulled at her. She had heard the whispers, the ancient stories. This was not how it was supposed to be. He nodded slowly, his gaze pleading. I know it's a bitter truth, Elara. And I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, let alone anything else. But I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. Please, just give me a chance to atone. Her gaze lingered on his, searching for any hint of deception. She found none, only profound regret and a desperate plea. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on his tormented face. She was still terrified, still angry, but for the first time since that terrible day, a tiny spark of something else ignited within her, a cautious, fragile hope, unraveling the web. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the small cabin, a stark contrast to the cloying perfume of the palace. Elara, her head still throbbing, watched Alaric as he meticulously examined the parchment that had summoned her. The flickering lamplight cast long shadows, making his usually regal features appear almost gaunt with worry. This is no clerical error, Alaric murmured, his voice a low rumble. He traced a finger along a subtle imperfection in the seal. The house of Valerius wax, yes, but tempered with a foreign element. A signature almost, if you know what to look for. Elara, propped against a stack of rough-spun blankets, felt a tremor of unease. What does that mean? It means someone went to great lengths to ensure your summons appeared genuine, yet subtly marked it for those in the know. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a dawning realization. And they wanted you, specifically, a commoner, untainted by court politics, easy to discredit. Her humiliation, though still raw, began to mix with a cold anger. But why me? Why not just choose another noble they could manipulate? Alaric sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because your presence, your innocence, would make the public rejection all the more effective. A statement. It would reinforce the existing power structures, remind everyone of their place. He picked up a small, intricately carved silver comb that had been in her belongings, one she'd received as a child from a traveling merchant. And this was tucked into the folds of your dress, wasn't it? Elara nodded slowly, a prickle of recognition. Yes, I thought it odd. It wasn't mine. Alaric turned the comb over in his fingers. The crest of House Thorn, Seraphina Thorn's house. She often gifts these to her ladies-in-waiting, or those she wishes to impress. He paused, his gaze hardening. But to place it upon you, a commoner, it's a direct insult, a mockery. The pieces began to click into place, a chilling mosaic of ambition and cruelty. So, Valerius for the official deception, and Seraphina for the public humiliation. Elara whispered, the names tasting bitter on her tongue. Precisely, Alaric confirmed, his jaw tight. Lord Valerius, my advisor, has always been an advocate for purity of bloodlines within the court. And Seraphina, she views the royal selection as a game,
A display of power. To orchestrate such a public downfall, to shatter the expectations of the other noble houses, it would serve both their purposes. He slammed a fist lightly on the table, the cabin's small frame rattling. They wanted to destabilize me, to show the court that even the Alpha King could be made to bend to their will. And they used you as their weapon. The revelation left Elara breathless. It was a dizzying leap from a misunderstanding to a calculated, malicious plot. But the details, the subtle clues, resonated with a terrible truth. Her anger, previously aimed solely at Alaric, now found a new, more focused target. We need to return, Elara said, her voice firmer than she expected. The thought of facing the opulent, treacherous palace again sent a shiver down her spine, but a burgeoning resolve now settled within her. We need to expose them. Alaric's eyes, which had been clouded with guilt, now held a fierce, determined light. You are right, but we cannot simply ride back in. We need proof, undeniable evidence, before we confront them. They are powerful, cunning. They will deny everything. He looked around the small, rustic cabin, then back at Elara, a flicker of something akin to admiration in his gaze. And we need a plan, a way to unravel this entire web. A fragile alliance had begun to form between them, forged in the crucible of betrayal and shared peril. The forest outside, once a symbol of her banishment, now felt like a temporary sanctuary, a place where they could plot their return, not as a king and a scorned commoner, but as two individuals united against a common enemy. The journey back to the palace would be fraught with danger, but for the first time since her humiliation, Elara felt a spark of purpose, a flicker of hope that justice, however painfully won, might yet be found. A royal revelation. The massive oak doors of the great hall swung inward with a resonant groan, silencing the murmuring assembly within. Every eye snapped towards the grand entrance as Alaric, regal and unyielding, strode in. Beside him, her head held high, despite a faint tremor in her hands, was Elara. Her simple, travel-worn dress contrasted sharply with the silks and jewels of the court, a silent defiance to their opulence. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered nobles, quickly followed by a flurry of whispers that grew louder with every step Elara took on the polished marble. Lord Valerius, standing near the dais, blanched, his usually impassive face momentarily losing its composure. Seraphina Thorn, poised and elegant in a gown of emerald green, a sly smile still playing on her lips from a whispered exchange, froze. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, narrowed as they fixed on Elara, then flickered to Alaric, a flicker of apprehension crossing their depths. Alaric mounted the steps to his throne, but did not sit. Instead, he turned to face the court,
his gaze sweeping over the sea of bewildered faces. He took Alara's hand, lacing their fingers together, a gesture that sent a shockwave through the room. Alara met his grip, drawing strength from his warmth. "My lords, my ladies," Alaric's voice boomed, cutting through the rising tide of speculation. "I stand before you today not merely as your king, but as a man who has made a grave error, and who has now, by the grace of the moon goddess, corrected it." He squeezed Alara's hand. "This woman, Alara, is my fated mate. She is your Luna." A cacophony erupted. Gasps, indignant shouts, and disbelieving murmurs filled the hall. Lord Valerius stepped forward, his voice strained. "Your Majesty, this cannot be. Her lineage is common, utterly unsuitable for the throne. The purity of our bloodlines, the strength of our kingdom, demands a Luna of noble birth." Seraphina, regaining her composure, added, her voice laced with mock concern, "Indeed, Your Majesty, this commoner was already dismissed from the selection. Are you well, my king? Perhaps the strain of recent events has clouded your judgment." Alaric's eyes, burning with a cold fury Alara had never seen, locked onto Valerius, then Seraphina. "My judgment, Lord Valerius, Lady Seraphina, has never been clearer." He paused, allowing the tension to coil tighter. The dismissal of Alara was no accident, no mere oversight. It was a calculated act of sabotage, orchestrated by those who sought to undermine my rule and destabilize this kingdom. He gestured to a royal guard who immediately brought forward a sealed scroll. Alaric broke the wax. "This document, a forged summons, bears the seal of the royal court but was never authorized by me. It was sent to Alara, luring her here under false pretenses, specifically to be publicly humiliated. The intention was to use her perceived unsuitability to sow discord among the nobility and challenge my authority." His voice dropped, deadly quiet. "And the architects of this betrayal stand before me now." He unrolled a second scroll, his gaze piercing Valerius. "Lord Valerius, your hand is evident in the meticulous planning of this deception, the subtle manipulations of court protocol designed to ensure Alara's public rejection. Your fervent advocacy for purity of bloodlines was a convenient mask for your ambition." Valerius's face drained of all color, his lips parting in a silent gasp of denial. Then Alaric turned his full wrath on Seraphina. "And Lady Seraphina Thorn, your venomous whispers, your carefully placed informants, your eagerness to exploit this fabricated scandal for your own gain are well documented. You sought to eliminate a perceived rival, and in doing so, you threatened the very stability of my reign." Seraphina's elegant facade crumbled, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning dread. The room was utterly silent, save for the ragged breaths of the accused. Alara felt a surge of triumph, a powerful vindication washing over her. The anger that had festered within her for so long now transformed into a fierce resolve. This was not just about her. It was about justice. Alaric raised his voice, resonating with royal authority. "These acts of treachery, aimed at the crown and at my fated Luna, cannot and will not go unpunished." He looked directly at Valerius and Seraphina, his voice a pronouncement of judgment. "You have plotted against your king. You have sought to tear apart the very fabric of this kingdom. Your treason is undeniable." A collective intake of breath swept through the court. The air crackled with the weight of Alaric's words, and the palpable fear emanating from the two conspirators. Elara, standing beside her king, felt a spark ignite within her, a realization that her journey, born from humiliation, was now irrevocably tied to the fate of the kingdom. Justice and reform. A hush, thick and suffocating, descended upon the assembled court. The king's declaration hung in the air, a bell tolling for the accused. Lord Valerius, his face a ghostly white, attempted to bluster. "Your Majesty, this is preposterous."
"A common weaver's word against a loyal lord's?" His voice cracked, a desperate attempt at indignation that fell flat. Beside him, Seraphina, usually so composed, clutched at the silken fabric of her gown, her eyes darting between Alaric and Alara, a flicker of raw fear replacing her usual disdain. "Your loyalty has been a poison, Valerius." Alaric's voice, though calm, held an edge of cold fury. "You conspired to undermine the crown, to manipulate the very fabric of this kingdom for your own gain. Seraphina, you were a willing participant, aiding and abetting these schemes." He gestured, and two royal guards, stern-faced and imposing, stepped forward, their movements deliberate. Valerius recoiled as their hands clamped onto his arms. "This is an outrage! I demand justice!" he spluttered, but his protests were drowned out by the murmurings of the court. Seraphina offered no resistance, as she too was taken, her posture still regal, but her eyes betraying a profound, chilling despair. The guards led them away, their footsteps echoing ominously in the sudden silence. Alaric turned, his gaze sweeping over the remaining nobles. "This kingdom has long suffered under the shadow of ambition and deceit," he stated, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "No longer. From this day forward, lineage alone will not dictate worth. True merit, loyalty, and a heart devoted to the well-being of our people will be the new currency of this court." He paused, then continued. "Effective immediately, the royal selection process will be entirely reformed. It will no longer be a spectacle for political maneuvering, but a genuine search for a partner worthy of the crown, chosen not by bloodline, but by character, intellect, and compassion." He looked at Alara, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "Furthermore, I will establish a council of advisors chosen for their wisdom and experience, not their titles. Their counsel will be sought on matters of state, ensuring diverse perspectives guide our decisions." Elara, seated beside him, felt a tremor of pride. She had spoken with Alaric late into the night, sharing her vision for a more equitable court where talent from all strata of society could be recognized. Her own humiliation had fueled a desire for change, not just for herself, but for every other commoner who might face similar injustice. "The royal treasury will also undergo scrutiny," Alaric declared, his gaze hardening slightly. "Any funds diverted for personal gain or illicit activities will be recovered, and those responsible held accountable." He looked out at the faces before him, some pale with apprehension, others nodding in cautious agreement. The atmosphere in the hall was charged, a mixture of fear and dawning hope. Elara leaned closer to Alaric, her voice a soft murmur only he could hear. "Perhaps also a decree regarding the treatment of common folk seeking justice? A direct channel for their grievances?" Alaric's jaw tightened in thought. Then he nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "An excellent suggestion, Luna. A public ombudsman will be appointed, free from noble influence, to hear the appeals of all citizens." He turned back to the court, his voice regaining its firm cadence. "And finally, a new position will be created, the royal advocate,
tasked with ensuring fair treatment and access to justice for all citizens, regardless of their social standing. The pronouncements landed like stones in a still pond, sending ripples of shock and anticipation through the assembly. Alaric, once a king bound by tradition and political necessity, was now a king transformed, guided by a Luna who championed justice and true worth. The kingdom, he knew, would never be the same. The path ahead was long, fraught with challenges, but with Alara by his side, Alaric felt a strength he'd never known.
Justice had begun its slow, deliberate march, and reform, like a persistent seed, was beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of a changing court. The true Luna. The crisp morning air hummed with an unusual energy, carrying the scent of pine and the distant murmur of the gathered populace. Today was not a day for decrees or arrests, but for affirmation. Elara, no longer the humble weaver or the publicly scorned girl, stood on the newly erected dais beside King Alaric, the weight of the silver circlet on her brow a tangible symbol of her transformation. It was a simple band, unadorned by jewels, yet it shone with the quiet strength of her journey. The crowd, initially hushed, erupted into a wave of cheers as Alaric, his hand firm and reassuring on her back, presented her to them. People of Eldoria, Alaric's voice, amplified by the morning stillness, carried across the square. You have witnessed a king's foolishness, and now you shall witness his redemption. My Luna, Elara, stands before you, not chosen by political maneuvering, but by fate, by courage, and by a spirit that refused to be broken. She is the heart of this kingdom, and together we shall forge a future built on justice and compassion. Elara met the gaze of 1,000 citizens, their faces a mixture of curiosity, hope, and recognition. She saw not judgment, but a nascent trust reflected in their eyes. She was no longer just Alaric's fated mate. She was their Luna, a testament to the idea that true worth lay not in lineage, but in character. A blush warmed her cheeks, but it was not one of embarrassment. It was pride, a quiet, resolute pride in the man beside her and in the path they had carved through adversity. Later, as the last echoes of celebration faded from the courtyard, Elara found Alaric seated on the edge of their bedchamber, his head in his hands. The regal robes of the day were discarded, replaced by a simple tunic. He looked weary, the weight of the past weeks etched onto his face. She approached him, her footsteps soft on the plush rug, and sat beside him, gently resting her hand on his arm. It was a long day, she murmured, her voice a balm in the quiet room. He lifted his head, his eyes, usually a vibrant gold, now shadowed with introspection. A necessary one, he corrected, his voice raspy. But every cheer, every approving glance, it's a reminder of how close I came to losing everything, to losing you. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the delicate lines on her palm. I remember the day of the selection, Elara, the way you stood, head held high, even as I banished you. My wolf was screaming, tearing at my insides, but I silenced him. For the stability of the kingdom, I told myself, for the sake of the crown, a political calculation born of my father's dying breath warnings against instability. A monstrous one, in hindsight. A pang of the old hurt surfaced, but it was quickly superseded by a deeper understanding. I know, she said, her voice gentle. I felt your wolf even then. A tremor through the earth, a desperate cry. It was what gave me the strength to keep going. She squeezed his hand. We were both victims of a larger game, Alaric. What matters is that we found our way back. He turned fully to her, his grip tightening. And now? Now we lead. with you by my side, not just as my Luna, but as my conscience, my guide. He looked into her eyes, a raw vulnerability in his own. I promise you, Alara, the kingdom we build will be one where no one suffers the humiliation you endured, where justice is not a luxury, but a birthright. Alara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The future stretched before them, not as a daunting unknown, but as a canvas awaiting their shared vision. She saw them, years from now, still side by side, their hair perhaps streaked with silver, their hands still intertwined. They would walk the palace halls, not as solitary figures of authority, but as a united front, their decisions guided by compassion, their judgments tempered with understanding. The reforms they had initiated would blossom, creating a society where merit truly mattered, where every voice, no matter how small, could be heard. She closed her eyes, picturing the ombudsman's office bustling with activity, the royal advocate tirelessly working on behalf of the common folk, the treasury's coffers transparent and accountable. It would be a kingdom where the whispers of conspiracy were replaced by the open dialogue of a truly representative council. Their journey had been fraught with pain and betrayal, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond, a love tempered in the fires of adversity. Together, they were not just King and Luna. They were the embodiment of a new era, a testament to the power of truth, forgiveness, and an enduring love that had defied all odds. The fight was not over, but their resolve was absolute.